At my son's wedding, his in-laws mocked me in front of 650 guests, pointing and saying, "Look at that trash, that's his mother." They didn't know I was a billionaire. My name is Linda Hall. I'm 68 years old, and on what should have been the happiest night of my life, I learned exactly how cruel people can be when they think you're beneath them. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? I'd love to know I'm not alone in sharing this story. If you're listening, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because what I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. Now, let me take you back to that June evening in Scottsdale, Arizona. The Fairmont Ballroom was glowing like something out of a dream. Gold drapes hung from 20-foot ceilings. White roses the size of dinner plates sat in crystal vases on every table. Imported orchids lined the walkways, their petals so perfect they almost didn't look real. The entire venue smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement, a display of wealth so grand that even the air felt heavier, like every breath cost money. 650 guests filled the space. Billionaires, lawmakers, socialites who lived for moments like this, where they could be photographed in their designer gowns and talk about who was wearing what and who was sitting where. And me? I was sitting at table 36. Let me explain what table 36 means at a wedding like this. It's the table near the exit door, the table where they put people they don't really want but feel obligated to invite. The table so far from the family section that you might as well be in a different building. While the bride's family sat front and center, bathed in camera flashes and champagne toasts, I sat in the back corner, practically hidden behind a decorative column. I wore a simple dress, nothing fancy. I bought it at a department store 2 years ago, and I'd worn it to 3 other events since then. My shoes were old flats that I'd repaired twice because the soles kept coming loose. My purse had a frayed strap that I'd sewn back together with thread that didn't quite match. I didn't look like I belonged there. And people noticed. The moment I walked in, I felt the stares. Women in silk gowns glanced at me, then whispered to each other. Men in tailored suits looked me up and down like they were trying to figure out who I was and why I was there. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was there for my son, Andrew, that his happiness was all that mattered, that the seat number and the whispers and the looks meant nothing as long as he was smiling. But it did matter, because as the night went on, the whispers got louder. 3 women at the table next to mine didn't even bother lowering their voices. "She looks like she took the bus here," one of them said, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "That's his mom? Seriously?" Another added, sipping champagne like the words didn't cut through the air like glass. "No wonder she's sitting back there," the third one laughed. I kept my head down. I smoothed my dress. I focused on my breathing, trying to ignore the heat rising in my cheeks. This was my son's wedding. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to embarrass him. But then it got worse. Much worse. The bride's father, Charles Whitmore, stepped onto the stage with his wife, Diane. They were the kind of wealthy people who wore their money like armor. Diane's dress probably cost more than most people's cars. Charles's watch glinted under the ballroom lights, heavy and gold and impossible to miss. He took the microphone, his voice booming across the room. "Good evening, everyone. What a beautiful night to celebrate love." The crowd applauded. Glasses clinked. Everyone smiled. Charles's gaze swept across the ballroom, taking in the sea of glittering guests. He looked proud, satisfied, like a king surveying his kingdom. And then his eyes landed on me. His smile faltered. Just for a second. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile anymore. It was more like disgust. He leaned toward his wife, Diane, still holding the microphone too close to his mouth. And that's when he said it. "Look at that trash, that's his mother." The microphone caught every word. Every single word echoed across the ballroom. For a moment, the room went silent. Then the laughter started. Quiet at first. A few chuckles from the people nearest to the stage. Then louder, more confident, like permission had been granted to mock the woman in the cheap dress sitting at table 36. Rebecca, the bride, my future daughter-in-law, let out a laugh, not a nervous one, not the kind that slips out before you can stop it. No, it was genuine. Like she'd been waiting for this moment. like humiliating me was part of the evening's entertainment. My son, Andrew, stood beside her in his tuxedo. He heard it. I know he did, because our eyes met across the ballroom. I waited for him to say something, to step forward, to tell Charles that wasn't acceptable, that I was his mother and I deserved respect. But he didn't. He just looked away. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Not quietly, not gently. It shattered. I had spent 68 years being polite, being quiet, being the woman who didn't make waves, who didn't demand attention, who stayed in the background so others could shine. But not tonight. Not anymore. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the marble floor, loud enough that a few people turned to look. They probably thought I was leaving, that I was going to slink away in shame, disappear through the exit door behind me, and let them enjoy the rest of their perfect evening. They were wrong. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my legs were steady, and I started walking, straight toward the stage. The ballroom fell silent as I moved through the crowd. Not the comfortable kind of silence. The kind where everyone stops mid-sentence, mid-laugh, mid-sip of champagne, because something unexpected is happening, and nobody knows what to do about it. 650 pairs of eyes followed me. I could feel their stares like heat on my skin. Some people looked confused. Others looked amused, like they were watching a comedy show and waiting for the punchline. A few looked embarrassed on my behalf, their faces turning red as they pretended to check their phones. But I kept walking, one foot in front of the other. Past the tables draped in silk, past the centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, past the guests who had spent the entire evening acting like I didn't exist. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I didn't stop. As I walked, memories flooded my mind. I thought about the night my husband died. Andrew was only 5 years old. I remember sitting on the edge of his bed, trying to explain that Daddy wasn't coming home, that it was just the two of us now, that we would figure it out together. I thought about the years that followed, working double shifts at the accounting office so I could afford his school supplies, making his lunches every morning before the sun came up, sitting in the parking lot of his soccer games, cheering louder than any other parent because I wanted him to know he was loved. I thought about the birthdays I celebrated with homemade cakes because I couldn't afford bakery ones, the Christmases where I wrapped presents in newspaper because wrapping paper seemed wasteful, the nights I stayed up late sewing patches on his jeans so he could wear them one more month. I did everything for him. Everything. And tonight, when his new family mocked me in front of hundreds of people, he looked away. That thought pushed me forward. Charles Whitmore saw me approaching. His expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to alarm. He stepped in front of the microphone, holding up one hand like a traffic cop. "Ma'am, this is family time," he said sharply, his voice carrying across the room. "Perhaps you could return to your seat." I stopped a few feet away from him. Our eyes met. "That's exactly why I'm here," I said quietly. His wife Diane moved beside him, her diamond necklace catching the light. She looked at me the way you might look at someone who wandered into the wrong event. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This really isn't the time for—" "For what?" I interrupted. My voice was calm, steady. "For the truth?" A murmur swirled through the crowd. Rebecca, the bride, stepped forward in her massive white gown. She looked panicked now, like she was suddenly realizing this wasn't going the way she'd planned. "Linda, please," she said, her voice tight. "Let's talk about this later, privately." "No," I said simply. That one word seemed to echo in the silence. I stepped around Charles and walked to the microphone. He tried to block me again, but I was done being blocked, done being pushed aside. Done being the woman who accepted whatever scraps of respect people felt like giving me. I reached for the microphone. My fingers closed around it, and I turned to face the ballroom. 650 people stared back at me, some with curiosity, some with barely concealed mockery, some with genuine confusion about what this strange old woman in the cheap dress could possibly have to say. I took a breath, then I spoke. "If I'm trash," I began, my voice clear and strong, "why does my signature pay for this venue?" The room seemed to freeze. People blinked. Heads tilted. Someone in the back whispered, "What did she just say?" I continued, looking directly at Charles and Diane. "Why does my signature pay for the catering? The flowers, the open bar you've all been enjoying, the 5-star honeymoon to Bali that's already been booked and paid for. Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Not just a few, dozens, hundreds. The sound washed over me like a wave. Charles's face drained of color. Diane's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. Rebecca stumbled backward, nearly tripping on the train of her gown. Someone caught her elbow to steady her. And Andrew, my son, stood frozen at the altar. His eyes were wide, his jaw had dropped. He looked like someone had just told him the sky was falling. "That's right," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Every single bill you submitted for this wedding was paid by Meridian Ridge Holdings." I paused, letting the name sink in. "A company I own. Completely." The ballroom erupted into chaos. People turned to their neighbors, whispering frantically. Some pulled out their phones, probably trying to search for information. Others simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd just heard. The poor old woman at table 36, the one they'd been mocking all evening, had just claimed she paid for the entire wedding. And judging by the expressions on the Whitmores' faces, every word I'd said was true. The whispers grew louder. People were no longer trying to be discreet. "Did she just say she owns a company? Meridian Ridge? I've heard that name before. Wait, she paid for all of this?" I stood at the microphone, watching the confusion spread across the ballroom like wildfire. For years, I had been invisible, a quiet presence in the background, someone people looked past without a second thought. Not anymore. Charles found his voice first. He stepped forward, his face red, his jaw clenched. "This is absurd," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You expect us to believe that you, of all people, funded this wedding." I met his gaze without flinching. "I don't expect you to believe anything," I said calmly. "I'm simply stating facts." Diane moved beside her husband, her hands fluttering nervously. The confident woman who had looked down on me all evening suddenly seemed smaller. "Linda, I think you're confused," she said, her voice strained. "The wedding expenses were handled through our financial advisors. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," I replied. I turned to address the crowd again. Every invoice submitted for this wedding was paid by Meridian Ridge Holdings. The Fairmont Ballroom rental, $487,000, paid in full 3 months ago. Another wave of gasps. The catering for 650 guests, premium menu, open bar, specialty cocktails, $72,000, paid. People were pulling out their phones now, searching frantically. The flowers you see everywhere. Imported orchids, white roses, custom arrangements, $38,000, paid. Rebecca's face had gone pale. She grabbed her father's arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, is this true?" Charles ignored her. He was staring at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to figure out how this was possible. I continued. "The photographer and videographer, the string quartet during the ceremony, the jazz band for the reception, the custom invitations with gold leaf detailing, the designer wedding cake with edible flowers." I paused. "The 5-star honeymoon suite in Bali, 2 weeks, first-class flights, private tours, all expenses included." I looked directly at Rebecca. $83,000. Already booked. Already paid. She stumbled backward again, her hand over her mouth. Andrew finally moved. He walked toward me slowly, like he was afraid I might disappear if he moved too fast. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "is this real?" I looked at my son. The boy I had raised alone. The young man I had sacrificed everything for. The person whose happiness had always mattered more to me than my own. "Yes," I said simply. "It's real." "But how?" he asked. "I don't understand. You never said anything. You never mentioned." "I know," I said. The ballroom had gone completely quiet now. Everyone was listening, watching, waiting for the explanation that would make sense of what they were hearing. A woman in a silver gown near the front spoke up, her voice uncertain. "But why wouldn't you tell anyone? Why hide it?" "Because," I said, turning back to the microphone, "I didn't want recognition. I didn't want credit. I didn't want anyone treating me differently because of money." I glanced at the Whitmores. I wanted to be judged on who I am, not what I have. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Charles cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Even if what you're saying is true, he said, his tone defensive, why would you pay anonymously? That doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense, I replied. Andrew asked me for help. He told me that your family wanted a wedding that matched your social status, but that you weren't willing to contribute unless certain conditions were met. Diane's face flushed. He came to me, I continued, and asked if there was any way I could help. So I did, through my company. But why not just tell us? Rebecca asked, her voice shaking. Why keep it a secret? I looked at her carefully. Because I didn't want your family thinking I expected anything in return. I didn't want you feeling obligated to me. I wanted you to marry my son because you loved him, not because his mother had money. The weight of those words settled over the room. Andrew was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Mom, I had no idea, he said. I thought the Whitmores were covering most of it. I thought your contribution was just... He trailed off, realizing how little he had actually asked. How easily he had accepted the narrative without questioning where the money was really coming from. A man in a tuxedo near the bar called out, "How do we know you're telling the truth?" Anyone can claim they own a company. Fair question, I said. I reached into my old purse, the one with the frayed strap, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had carried it with me tonight, not knowing if I would need it, but some part of me had been prepared. I unfolded it slowly. This is a copy of the wire transfer confirmation for the venue payment. Authorized by Meridian Ridge Holdings. Signed by L. Hall. I held it up. The LLC is registered in my name. I am the sole owner and authorized signatory. Every payment made for this wedding went through accounts I control. Charles grabbed the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning it frantically. His face went from red to white in seconds. This can't be, he muttered. But it was. Diane was shaking her head, her carefully styled hair beginning to come loose. We received confirmation emails, she said weakly. We thought the LLC was part of our financial network. We never thought to check. Why would you? I said gently. You assumed someone like me couldn't possibly have that kind of money. You judged me based on my clothes, my shoes, my seat number. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. Rebecca spoke again, her voice barely audible. Linda, I don't understand. If you have all this money, why do you dress like... She stopped herself, but the damage was done. Like what? I asked. Like someone who doesn't care about impressing people? Like someone who values comfort over status? I looked around the ballroom. Wealth doesn't define me. It never has. I built my company quietly. I invested carefully. I lived simply, not because I had to, but because I chose to. My voice grew stronger. But tonight, you all made a choice too. You chose to mock me, to laugh at me, to treat me like I was less than human because I didn't look the part you expected. Charles tried one more time to salvage the moment. This is all very dramatic, he said, forcing a smile. But surely we can discuss this privately, after the reception. No, I said. That word again. Simple, final. We're discussing it now. In front of everyone who laughed, everyone who whispered, everyone who thought they were better than me. I turned to my son one last time. Andrew, I paid for this wedding because I love you, because I wanted you to have the day you dreamed of, but I will never again stay silent while people treat me with disrespect. He nodded, unable to speak, and then I delivered the truth they had all been avoiding. My company is worth over $3 billion. I own commercial properties across Arizona. I hold significant shares in medical and technology companies. I have more money than most people in this room will ever see. The silence was deafening. But money doesn't buy class, and tonight you proved that better than I ever could. I could see the questions forming in their eyes. The same question that always comes when people discover the truth about someone they thought they knew. How? How did a woman in discount store clothing build $1 billion empire? How did someone so ordinary become so extraordinary? Let me take you back. Back to the beginning. Back to when I was just a girl growing up in Tempe, Arizona, long before any of this existed. I was born in 1957. My father worked construction. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in Paradise Valley. We didn't have much, but what we had was honest. earned through sweat and discipline, and the kind of work that leaves calluses on your hands. My parents taught me two things that shaped everything that came after. First, money isn't evil. Poverty is. Poverty traps you, limits you, tells you what you can and cannot dream. Second, the people who have money aren't always the ones who deserve it, and the people who deserve it aren't always the ones who have it. Those lessons stayed with me. I met my husband, David, when I was 23. He was an engineer for a small tech company in Phoenix, smart, kind, and completely uninterested in showing off. We got married in a courthouse with 2 witnesses. No fancy venue, no imported flowers, just love and a promise to build something together. We had Andrew 3 years later. David was a wonderful father, the kind who came home from work and immediately got down on the floor to play with his son, who read bedtime stories in funny voices, who made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Saturday mornings. He died when Andrew was 5. A car accident, quick, senseless, the kind of tragedy that doesn't come with warnings or second chances. One moment, I had a partner, a future, a plan. The next moment, I had a kindergartner who kept asking when Daddy was coming home and a bank account that wouldn't last 6 months. I was 29 years old, a widow with a young son, and absolutely no idea how I was going to survive. But I did. I took a job at a small accounting firm in Tempe. Nothing glamorous. I processed invoices, managed spreadsheets, helped small business owners file their taxes. The pay was modest, but it was steady. Every morning, I dropped Andrew at school, worked 8 hours, picked him up, made dinner, helped with homework, and tucked him into bed. Then I stayed up late, teaching myself about investments, reading books about real estate, studying the market trends that most people ignored. I didn't have the luxury of taking risks, but I also didn't have the luxury of staying safe. So I found a middle ground. I saved every dollar I could. I cut coupons. I bought clothes at thrift stores. I repaired things instead of replacing them, and slowly, painfully, I built a small cushion of savings. By the time Andrew was 10, I had saved $20,000. It doesn't sound like much, and compared to the wealth I would eventually build, it wasn't. But at the time, it felt like a fortune. I had a choice to make. I could keep that money in a savings account, earning almost nothing, watching inflation slowly eat away at its value. Or I could invest it. The Phoenix area was changing in the early 2000s. The suburbs were expanding. Strip malls were popping up everywhere. And in the aftermath of the dot-com crash, commercial real estate prices had dropped significantly. Most people were scared. They saw risk. I saw opportunity. I used my savings to make a down payment on a small, distressed commercial building in Tempe. It was nothing special, just a run-down space that had been foreclosed on, sitting empty for months. I cleaned it myself, painted it myself, fixed the plumbing with help from a neighbor who owed me a favor. Then I rented it to a local business for a modest monthly rate. That rental income became my second stream of revenue, and that's when I created Meridian Ridge Holdings. It started as nothing more than a limited liability company registered with the state, a P.O. box, a business license, a way to separate my personal finances from my investments. Nobody paid attention to it. Nobody cared. But over the next 15 years, I poured every spare dollar into that company. When the housing market crashed in 2008, everyone panicked. They sold properties at massive losses, desperate to get out before things got worse. I bought foreclosed strip malls. I bought medical office buildings that banks were practically giving away. I bought industrial land on the outskirts of Scottsdale that everyone said would never develop. I wasn't reckless. I did my research. I studied tenant demographics, traffic patterns, zoning laws. I made careful, calculated decisions based on data, not emotion. And slowly, property by property, investment by investment, Meridian Ridge grew. I never told Andrew, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted him to grow up normal. I wanted him to understand the value of hard work, to appreciate what he had, to develop character instead of entitlement. I watched too many wealthy families raise children who became spoiled, lazy, incapable of functioning without money cushioning their every mistake. I refused to do that to my son. So I kept living simply, I kept driving the same old car. I kept shopping at discount stores. I kept repairing my shoes instead of buying new ones. On paper, I was worth millions by the time Andrew graduated high school. But to him, to our neighbors, to everyone around us, I was just Linda, the single mom who worked in accounting. The woman who clipped coupons and packed lunches and showed up to every parent-teacher conference. Nobody suspected the truth, and that's exactly how I wanted it. By the time Andrew went to college, Meridian Ridge had expanded beyond real estate. I had invested early in a medical device company that later went public, multiplying my investment by 12. I had purchased shares in several tech startups during their early funding rounds. Some failed. That's the nature of investing. But the ones that succeeded more than made up for the losses. I reinvested every profit, every dividend, every capital gain. The company kept growing. By 2015, I was worth over $1 billion. By 2020, it was close to $3 billion. And through it all, I maintained the same routine, the same lifestyle, the same quiet presence that allowed me to move through the world without drawing attention. I attended Andrew's college graduation in a dress I'd owned for 5 years. I helped him move into his first apartment, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs in my worn-out sneakers. I met Rebecca for the first time at a casual dinner where I ordered the cheapest item on the menu because that's what I'd always done. None of them knew. None of them suspected. And when Andrew came to me 6 months ago, nervous and embarrassed, asking if there was any way I could help contribute to his wedding, I said yes without hesitation. Not because I wanted recognition, not because I wanted gratitude, but because I loved my son, and I wanted him to have the wedding he dreamed of. So I arranged for Meridian Ridge to handle all the payments, quietly, anonymously, through the company's registered agent, shielding my personal identity from every invoice, every contract, every vendor. The Whitmores received confirmation emails showing payment from an LLC. They assumed it was part of their own financial network. They never bothered to check the ownership. Why would they? A woman like me couldn't possibly have that kind of money. I was just the groom's mother, the quiet one in the background, the one who didn't matter. Until tonight. Tonight, when they called me trash in front of 650 people. Tonight, when my own son looked away instead of defending me. Tonight, when I realized that silence wasn't strength, it was surrender, and I was done surrendering. Standing at that microphone, looking out at the shocked faces of people who had judged me based on appearances, I felt something shift inside me. For decades, I had believed that humility meant making myself small, that kindness meant accepting disrespect, that love meant sacrificing my dignity. I was wrong. True strength isn't quiet endurance. It's knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less. The ballroom was still silent, everyone processing what I had just shared. But I could see the skepticism in some faces, the questions, the need for proof beyond my words. So I gave them the details, the kind of details that only someone who actually built an empire would know. Meridian Ridge Holdings started with one distressed property in Tempe. I said, my voice steady, a 1,200 square foot commercial space that I bought for $42,000 in 2003. I put down $8,000. The rest was financed. A few people shifted in their seats, leaning forward slightly. I cleaned that building myself, scrubbed floors, painted walls, fixed broken tiles. Then I rented it to a small insurance office for $900 a month. I paused, letting them do the math. After mortgage payments, property taxes, and basic maintenance, I cleared about $200 monthly. Not much, but it was a start. Andrew was listening intently now, hearing for the first time how everything began. Over the next 2 years, I saved every penny from that rental income. I lived on my accounting salary and put the property revenue back into the company. By 2005, I had enough for a down payment on a second property. I looked around the room. This one was bigger. A small strip mall in Mesa that had been foreclosed during a local business downturn. 4 units, empty, neglected. Everyone said I was making a mistake. Someone near the back called out, "How much did you pay?" $98,000, I replied. Market value should have been closer to $200,000, but the bank wanted it gone. They accepted my offer within a week. I could see people pulling out their phones again, probably searching property records, trying to verify my story. They would find it. Every word was true. I filled those units within 6 months, I continued. A nail salon, a small accounting firm, a martial arts studio, a pet grooming business. Nothing fancy, just local businesses that needed affordable space. My voice grew stronger as I spoke. By 2007, Meridian Ridge owned 5 commercial properties. The rental income was enough that I could quit my job at the accounting firm and manage the company full-time. Diane spoke up, her voice uncertain. "But that's still a long way from billions," she said. "You're right," I agreed. That's when everything changed. I took a breath, remembering the fear and excitement of those years. In 2008, the financial crisis hit. The housing market collapsed. Commercial real estate prices dropped by 40, sometimes 50%. People were terrified. Banks were failing. Retirement accounts were disappearing. The room was completely focused on me now. I saw something different. I saw properties being sold at a fraction of their actual value. I saw panic creating opportunity. Charles frowned, clearly uncomfortable with where this was going. "I borrowed against my existing properties," I said. "I took calculated risks, and I bought medical office buildings in Scottsdale, industrial warehouses in Chandler, small shopping centers in Gilbert." I counted on my fingers as I spoke. Between 2008 and 2012, Meridian Ridge acquired 23 properties. Most people thought I was insane. They said the market would never recover. I smiled slightly. They were wrong. By 2015, every single property I'd purchased had doubled in value, some tripled. A man in a dark suit near the front spoke up. "What about the medical device company you mentioned?" "Good memory," I said. "In 2010, a friend from my old accounting firm told me about a startup developing minimally invasive surgical tools. They were looking for early investors." I paused. I invested $50,000 for a 5% stake in the company. Most people told me it was too risky, that medical devices take years to develop and even longer to get approved. Andrew's eyes widened. He was beginning to understand the scale of what I'd built. "The company went public in 2016, I said. "My initial investment was worth $6 million. Gasps echoed through the ballroom again. I sold half my shares and reinvested the profits into other opportunities. Tech startups, healthcare companies, green energy projects. I looked directly at Charles. By 2018, Meridian Ridge Holdings was managing a portfolio worth over $1 billion. Real estate across Arizona, equity stakes in 12 different companies, strategic investments in emerging markets. His face had gone pale, and I did it all quietly, I continued. Through the LLC structure, my name never appeared on public documents. Every property was held under subsidiary companies. Every investment was processed through the main holding company. Rebecca found her voice. "But why keep it secret? Why not tell Andrew? Why not tell anyone?" I turned to her. "Because the moment people know you have money, everything changes. They treat you differently. They want things from you. They make assumptions about who you are based on numbers in a bank account." My voice softened. I wanted Andrew to build his own character, to work hard because it mattered, not because he was waiting for an inheritance, to choose a partner who loved him for who he is, not what his family has. The weight of those words settled over the room. "I also kept it private for legal protection," I added. "The LLC structure shields my personal assets. It provides privacy. It allows me to make business decisions without public scrutiny." A woman in a blue dress spoke up. "So when the wedding invoices were paid by Meridian Ridge, the vendors just assumed it was a legitimate company?" "Exactly," I said. "The company has excellent credit, a strong payment history, professional business accounts. When invoices were submitted, they were paid promptly and in full through standard wire transfers." I glanced at the Whitmores. "Your financial advisors saw the confirmation emails. They saw payments coming from an established LLC. They never questioned it because they had no reason to. In their world, families like yours use holding companies all the time for privacy and tax purposes." Charles finally found his voice again. "So you're saying you let us believe we were handling the finances?" "I let you believe whatever you wanted to believe," I replied calmly. "I never claimed credit. I never demanded recognition. I simply paid the bills when Andrew asked for help. The truth was undeniable now. By last year, Meridian Ridge was worth over $3 billion, I said. $900 million in commercial real estate, $1.2 billion in stock holdings across various sectors, $700 million in liquid assets and cash reserves, the rest in smaller investments and emerging opportunities. I looked around the ballroom one more time. And the woman you called trash? The one you laughed at? The one sitting at table 36 like she didn't matter? I paused. She built it all. Every dollar, every property, every investment. My voice grew quiet but firm. And she did it without anyone's help, without anyone's approval, without anyone even knowing. The silence that followed was absolute. They finally understood. The poor old woman they had mocked was one of the wealthiest people in the room. And she had been standing right there the entire time. Someone in the crowd finally asked the question that was on everyone's mind. If you have all that money, why did you agree to pay for the wedding in the first place? It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. I looked at Andrew, still standing near the altar, his face wet with tears. Because 6 months ago my son came to me with a problem, I said. Andrew closed his eyes, clearly remembering that conversation. It was a Tuesday evening in December, I continued. He showed up at my house, unexpected. I made him dinner, the way I always did. Spaghetti with homemade sauce, garlic bread, nothing fancy. I could see the memory playing across his face. We ate in silence for a while. Then he told me he wanted to get married. My voice softened. I was happy for him. Truly. I asked about the plans, the venue, the date, all the details a mother wants to know. I paused. That's when he told me about the Whitmore's conditions. Diane shifted uncomfortably. Charles stared at the floor. Rebecca's family had very specific expectations, I said. They wanted a wedding that reflected their social status, a venue that would impress their friends, catering that would be talked about for years, a guest list that included everyone who mattered in their circle. The crowd listened intently. But they weren't willing to contribute financially unless Andrew and Rebecca agreed to certain terms. They wanted control over the guest list, the seating arrangements, the entire event. I looked at Charles directly. They wanted a wedding that showcased the Whitmore name, but they expected Andrew to pay for the privilege of joining their family. A murmur spread through the ballroom. My son came to me that night, embarrassed and stressed, I continued. He said he loved Rebecca, that he wanted to marry her, but he couldn't afford the kind of wedding her family demanded, and he didn't want to start his marriage drowning in debt. Andrew's shoulders shook slightly. He asked if there was any way I could help, maybe contribute a few $1,000s, enough to ease the pressure. I smiled sadly. He had no idea what I could actually afford, and I realized in that moment that I had two choices. The ballroom was silent again. I could tell him the truth. Reveal everything, show him the bank statements and property portfolios and investment accounts. Let him know that money was no object. I shook my head. Or I could help him quietly, the way I'd always done, while protecting the lesson I'd spent his entire life teaching. My voice grew firmer. I chose the second option. I told him I would take care of everything, that he didn't need to worry about the costs. I looked at the crowd, but I didn't tell him how. I didn't explain where the money would come from. I simply said I would handle it through a business arrangement. Rebecca spoke up, her voice small. But why hide it? Why not just pay for everything openly? Because the moment people know you have money, expectations change, I replied. If your family knew I was funding the wedding, they would have treated me differently. They would have asked for more, demanded changes, felt entitled to make decisions about how my money was spent. I gestured around the ballroom. This wedding cost $487,000. If your parents knew I was paying that bill, do you think they would have let me sit at table 36? Do you think they would have made jokes about my clothes? The answer was obvious. I also didn't want you marrying Andrew because of his mother's wealth, I said to Rebecca. I wanted to know that you loved him for who he is, that your commitment was genuine. My voice grew quieter. Money complicates everything. It changes relationships, creates resentment, builds expectations that can never be met. I turned back to the crowd. So I arranged for all payments to go through Meridian Ridge, The company's registered agent processed every invoice. Every contract listed the LLC as the responsible party. Every wire transfer came from business accounts. A man near the side called out, "But didn't the vendors question it? Didn't anyone ask who owned the company?" "Why would they?" I replied. "Meridian Ridge has been operating for over 20 years. It has excellent credit, a proven payment history, professional business accounts with major banks. When the Fairmont received payment confirmation, they saw a legitimate company fulfilling its obligations." I smiled slightly. The initials on the authorized signatory line were L. Hall. Nobody connected those initials to the mother of the groom sitting in the back of the ballroom. Charles finally spoke, his voice strained. "But surely there was some way to trace it back to you." "Of course," I said, "if anyone had bothered to look. The LLC is registered with the Arizona Corporation Commission. The ownership documents are public record. Anyone with internet access could have searched the company name and found my name listed as the owner." I paused for effect. But nobody looked, because nobody thought the woman in the cheap dress could possibly be worth investigating. The truth of that statement hung in the air. "There's something else you should know," I continued. "When I agreed to fund this wedding, I made sure the contracts included specific clauses." Rebecca's eyes widened. "What kind of clauses?" "Cancellation clauses," I said calmly, "written in my favor." The room seemed to hold its breath. As the authorized signatory for Meridian Ridge, I retained the right to cancel or retract any payment up to 30 days after the event date, with no penalty, no legal liability. Charles went pale. "You're saying you can take back every payment?" "Not can," I corrected. "Could, at any time." Diane's voice came out as a whisper. "Why would you include clauses like that?" "Protection," I said simply. "I've built my wealth by being careful, by planning for every possibility, by never entering a contract without understanding exactly what I'm agreeing to." I looked at Andrew. "I paid for this wedding because I love my son, because I wanted him to have a beautiful day, because a mother's love doesn't come with conditions or limits." My voice cracked slightly. "But I never expected to be mocked, to be called trash, to be treated like I didn't belong at my own son's wedding." Tears were streaming down Andrew's face now. "I never imagined that the family my son was joining would look at me with such contempt," I continued, "that they would laugh at my clothes, whisper about my appearance, seat me in the back like I was an embarrassment." I looked around the ballroom one final time. "I funded this wedding anonymously because I believed it was the right thing to do, because I wanted my son to be happy, because I thought that love and family mattered more than status or appearances." My voice grew steady and strong. I was wrong. The two words echoed in the silence. "Love and family do matter," I said, "but so does respect, so does dignity, so does basic human decency." I paused. "And tonight, I learned that some people only value those things when they think you're worthy of them." The memories came flooding back as I stood at that microphone, looking at the faces of people who had treated me like I was invisible. Let me tell you what the months leading up to this wedding were really like. It started with the engagement announcement. Andrew called me, excited and nervous, telling me he'd proposed to Rebecca at a fancy restaurant overlooking Camelback Mountain. I was thrilled for him. I asked all the questions a mother should ask. "Are you happy? Does she make you laugh? Do you love her?" Yes to all of them. 2 weeks later, I was invited to the Whitmore estate for an engagement dinner. I drove there in my old car, the one with the dented bumper and the air conditioning that only worked on the highest setting. I parked between a Mercedes and a Tesla, feeling suddenly self-conscious about the rust spots near my rear wheel. The Whitmore house was enormous, 3 stories of stone and glass overlooking perfectly manicured lawns, a fountain in the circular driveway, security cameras at every corner. I rang the doorbell carrying a homemade apple pie, the only thing I could think to bring. Diane answered the door. She looked at the pie like I'd handed her a science experiment. "Oh, how? Homemade," she said, taking it with 2 fingers. "The caterer's already prepared dessert, but I'm sure the staff will find somewhere to put this." That was my first clue. During dinner, I was seated at the far end of the table, so far from the conversation that I had to lean forward to hear what anyone was saying. Charles dominated the discussion, talking about his golf club, his business deals, the private jet he'd just upgraded. Nobody asked me a single question. Not where I worked, not where I lived, not even how I'd raised Andrew by myself. I was simply there, a necessary guest because I happened to be the groom's mother. After dinner, Rebecca pulled out wedding magazines and started talking about venues. Her mother suggested the Fairmont, calling it elegant and exclusive. Andrew looked nervous. "Mom, would that be okay?" he asked, glancing at me. "Whatever makes you both happy," I said. Rebecca smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Perfect," she said. "We'll book it." Nobody asked what I could afford. Nobody discussed splitting costs. Nobody even acknowledged that weddings require money and planning and compromise. They simply made decisions and moved forward, assuming everything would work itself out. Over the next few months, I was invited to exactly 3 wedding planning meetings. The first was at a bridal boutique in Scottsdale. Rebecca tried on dresses while her mother and 2 sisters sat on a velvet couch, sipping champagne and offering opinions. I sat in a chair near the door, watching. When Rebecca finally found the dress, a stunning gown with layers of silk and intricate beading, she turned to show everyone. Her mother cried. Her sisters applauded. I smiled and said, "You look beautiful." Rebecca glanced at me briefly, nodded, then turned back to the mirror. That was it. The second meeting was for cake tasting. We sat at a long table at an upscale bakery, trying different flavors: vanilla with raspberry filling, chocolate with salted caramel, lemon with buttercream frosting. Diane and Rebecca discussed each option in detail, debating which would photograph best, which their guests would prefer. I ate my samples quietly, occasionally nodding when someone asked my opinion. At the end, Rebecca chose a 5-tier cake with edible gold leaf and fresh flowers. $4,000, the baker announced. Rebecca didn't even flinch. She just signed the contract and handed it to her mother to process. I wondered who they thought was paying for all of this. The third meeting was for seating arrangements. We gathered at the Whitmore house, spreading out a large diagram of the ballroom on their dining room table. Rebecca and Diane had color-coded cards for each guest, organizing them by importance and relationship. I watched as they placed family members at tables near the stage, close friends at surrounding tables, business associates and acquaintances filling in the middle sections. Then Rebecca picked up a card with my name on it. She hesitated, looking at her mother. Diane glanced at the chart, then at me, then back at the chart. "Table 36 should work," she said casually, "near the back. That way she'll have easy access to the exit if she needs to leave early." My stomach tightened. "I wasn't planning to leave early," I said quietly. "Of course not," Diane replied, not looking at me. "It's just practical. You know, in case you get tired." I was 68, not 90, but I didn't argue. Rebecca placed my card on table 36 without another word. That's when I started to understand how they really saw me. Not as family. Not as Andrew's mother. As an obligation. An inconvenience. Someone who had to be included but didn't really matter. Andrew noticed some of it, I think. But every time I saw concern flash across his face, Rebecca would touch his arm, smile, redirect his attention, and he would let her. I watched my son, the boy I had raised to be kind and thoughtful, slowly transform into someone who cared more about fitting into the Whitmore world than standing up for his own mother. One evening, about a month before the wedding, I mentioned to Andrew that I felt a bit sidelined in the planning process. "I know, Mom," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Rebecca's family is just very particular. They have certain expectations." "And what about your expectations?" I asked gently. He looked away. "I just want everyone to get along. I don't want to cause problems." That's when I realized he had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. The night of the wedding, when I arrived at the Fairmont in my simple dress and old shoes, I told myself it didn't matter, that I was there to celebrate my son's happiness, that my feelings were less important than keeping the peace. But then the whispers started. The looks. The comments about my outfit, my purse, the fact that I'd taken a regular car instead of a luxury vehicle. I tried to ignore it. I smiled at people who wouldn't smile back. I made polite conversation with guests who responded with one-word answers before turning away. I sat at table 36, alone, watching the celebration happening without me. And then Charles took the microphone. I thought he was going to make a speech about love, about family, about the joy of bringing 2 people together. Instead, he looked at me and said those words. Look at that trash. That's his mother. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not quietly, not gently. It shattered completely. Because I realized that all these months, all these meetings, all these moments where I'd been pushed aside and ignored and treated like I didn't matter, they had been building to this. They had never respected me. They had tolerated me. And now, surrounded by their friends and their status and their wealth, they felt comfortable showing their true feelings. They thought I was powerless. They thought I had no choice but to accept whatever treatment they gave me. They thought wrong. Standing at that microphone, with 650 people staring at me, I made a decision. I would never again allow anyone to treat me this way. I would never again make myself small so others could feel big. I would never again stay silent while people mocked everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd built. I had spent my entire life being humble, being quiet, being the person who didn't make waves. But humility without self-respect isn't virtue. It's surrender, and I was done surrendering. The ballroom was still silent, every eye fixed on me. They were waiting, wondering what would happen next. I looked at Charles and Diane, their faces pale under the elegant lighting. "I told you that I funded this wedding through Meridian Ridge Holdings," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I told you that every contract was signed by me as the authorized signatory." They nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "What I didn't tell you," I continued, "is what happens next." Rebecca grabbed her father's arm, her knuckles white. I took a breath. As of this moment, I am exercising my right under the cancellation clauses to retract all payments made by Meridian Ridge Holdings for this event. The gasps were immediate and loud. "What?" Charles sputtered. "You can't do that." "Actually, I can," I said. And I just did. Diane stepped forward, her voice rising. "That's not legal. You can't just cancel payments after the event has already happened." "I can when the contracts specifically allow it," I replied. Every vendor agreement included a 30-day cancellation window with full retraction rights. My lawyers made sure of that. I pulled another document from my purse. This is a copy of the venue contract. Section 12, paragraph 4. The authorized signatory retains the right to cancel and retract payment within 30 days of the event date for any reason, with no penalty to the signing party. I held it up so everyone could see. The same clause exists in the catering contract, the florist agreement, the photographer's terms, and every other service contract associated with this wedding. Charles snatched the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning frantically. His face went from red to white in seconds. "This can't be enforceable," he said, his voice shaking. "It's perfectly enforceable," I said. My lawyers reviewed every contract before I signed. The vendors agreed to these terms because Meridian Ridge has an excellent reputation, and they trusted the payment would be honored. I paused. It would have been, if I hadn't been treated like garbage in front of hundreds of people. The crowd erupted into whispers. People were pulling out phones, probably trying to look up whether such contracts were legal, whether I could actually do what I was claiming. Diane's voice came out as a desperate plea. "Linda, please, think about what you're doing. This is Andrew's wedding. Your son's special day." "I am thinking about Andrew," I said, looking at my son. "I'm thinking about the man I raised, the man who stood there and said nothing while his mother was publicly humiliated." Andrew flinched. "I'm thinking about the lesson he needs to learn," I continued. "That silence in the face of cruelty is the same as participation." Rebecca's voice cracked as she spoke. "But the vendors, they've already provided their services. How is that fair to them?" "The vendors will be fine," I said calmly. "The contracts stipulate that in the event of cancellation, responsibility for payment reverts to the party who originally requested the services." I looked at Charles. "That would be you." His jaw dropped. "The venue bill, $487,000, due immediately upon cancellation of the original payment." Diane made a sound like she'd been struck. "The catering, $72,000. The flowers, $38,000. The photography and videography, $22,000. The cake, $4,000. I continued listing every expense, every service, every detail that had gone into creating this elaborate event. The honeymoon package in Bali, $83,000, already booked, already confirmed. If you want to keep that reservation, you'll need to pay for it within 48 hours. Rebecca started crying, her carefully applied makeup running down her face. "You're destroying everything," she sobbed. "No," I said firmly. "I'm simply withdrawing my support. There's a difference." Charles tried one more time, his voice taking on a pleading tone that didn't suit him. "Linda, we can work this out. We can apologize. We can make this right." "You had the chance to make it right," I said. "When you saw me sitting at table 36, when you heard the whispers and the mocking comments, when you took that microphone and called me trash." I stepped closer to him. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." A man in a dark suit, probably one of the Whitmore's lawyers, pushed through the crowd. "Mrs. Hall, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This could result in significant legal complications." I turned to him calmly. "I have a team of lawyers on retainer. They've already reviewed every aspect of these contracts. Everything I'm doing is legal and binding." The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "Even so, the optics of this are—" "The optics?" I interrupted. "The optics of what? A woman defending herself after being publicly humiliated? A mother who finally had enough of being treated with contempt?" I looked around the ballroom. If anyone here is concerned about optics, perhaps they should consider how it looks to mock a guest at a wedding, to call someone trash because of their clothing, to laugh at a woman who did nothing but try to support her son. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Andrew spoke. His voice was thick with emotion, barely above a whisper at first. "Mom." I turned to look at him. "Mom, I'm so sorry." He walked toward me slowly, tears streaming down his face. "I should have defended you. I should have said something. I should have told them to stop." His voice broke completely. "I was scared. I was worried about causing a scene, about making Rebecca's family angry, about ruining the wedding." He stood in front of me now, looking more like the little boy I'd raised than the man he'd become. "But none of that matters. None of it. Because you're my mother, and you've given me everything, and I let them treat you like you were nothing." The ballroom was completely silent now, everyone watching this moment between mother and son. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Andrew said. "I know I don't, but I'm asking for it anyway, because I love you, and I'm so sorry." I looked at my son, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes, the understanding of what he'd allowed to happen. "Andrew," I said softly, "I will always love you. You're my son. Nothing changes that." I paused. "But love and respect are different things. You can love someone and still hold them accountable for their actions." He nodded, understanding. "Tonight you chose to stay silent when I needed you most," I continued. "That hurt more than anything the Whitmores said or did." "I know," he whispered. "But you're here now," I said. "You're speaking up now. And that means something." I reached out and touched his face gently. "We can rebuild what was broken, but it will take time. And it will require you to be the man I raised you to be, not the man who's afraid to stand up for what's right." He grabbed my hand, holding it tightly. "I promise," he said. "I promise I'll do better." I nodded. Then I turned back to the Whitmores, my voice steady and final. "The cancellations have already been processed. You'll receive formal notification from Meridian Ridge's legal team within 24 hours. All outstanding balances are now your responsibility." Charles and Diane stood frozen, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "This wedding cost nearly $700,000 when you include all the extras," I said. "Consider it an expensive lesson in respect." I looked at the crowd one last time. Respect isn't something you earn through money or status or designer clothes. It's something you give to every human being, regardless of how they look or where they sit or what you think they can offer you. My voice grew stronger. "Tonight, you learned that the woman you mocked, the woman you called trash, had the power to take everything away." I paused. "Remember that the next time you judge someone by their appearance." I turned away from the microphone, away from the Whitmores, away from the 650 guests who now understood exactly who I was. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I walked toward the exit. Behind me, the ballroom erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, questions being shouted, the Whitmores trying to explain, to salvage what remained of their dignity. I didn't look back. Andrew caught up to me just as I reached the doors. "Mom, wait, please." I stopped but didn't turn around. "Let me come with you," he said, his voice desperate. "Please, I need to talk to you." I finally looked at him. His tuxedo was rumpled now, his bow tie crooked. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. He looked lost. "Okay," I said quietly. We walked through the hotel lobby together, past guests who stared and whispered, past hotel staff who pretended not to notice the drama unfolding. The warm Scottsdale night air hit us as we stepped outside. It was nearly 11 o'clock, and the temperature had dropped to something comfortable. The sky was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I walked to a bench near the fountain in the hotel courtyard and sat down. Andrew sat beside me, keeping a small distance between us, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be close. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fountain bubbled softly. Cars passed on the street beyond the hotel entrance. Somewhere in the distance, music played from another event. Finally, Andrew broke the silence. "I don't know where to start," he said. "Start with the truth," I replied. He took a shaky breath. "I knew they were treating you badly. I saw it at the engagement dinner, at the dress fitting, at every planning meeting." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I told myself it wasn't that bad, that you didn't mind, that you understood they were just particular about things." "Andrew," I said gently. "I know," he interrupted. "I know. I was making excuses. I was lying to myself because it was easier than confronting them, easier than risking my relationship with Rebecca." He looked at me, fresh tears forming. "I was a coward. There's no other word for it. When it mattered most, when you needed me to stand up for you, I chose them over you." The pain in his voice was real. "Why?" I asked, not accusingly, just honestly. He thought for a moment. "Because I wanted to belong," he said finally. "The Whitmores represent everything I thought I wanted. Success, status, connections. A world where everything is easy and doors open just because of your name." He shook his head. "I got so caught up in that world that I forgot where I came from. I forgot the woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had." I listened without interrupting. "Tonight?" When Charles said those words, when everyone laughed, I felt sick, Andrew continued, but I was paralyzed. I kept thinking, if I defend her, they'll be angry. If I cause a scene, Rebecca will be upset. If I speak up, I'll ruin everything." His voice cracked. "And then you stood up, and you walked to that microphone, and you showed more courage in 5 minutes than I've shown in my entire life." He turned to face me fully. "I'm ashamed, Mom, not because of what you revealed about your money, but because of what I revealed about my character." The honesty in his words touched something deep inside me. "Andrew," I said, "do you know why I never told you about the money? You said you wanted me to grow up humble." "That's part of it," I agreed. "But there's more." I looked up at the stars. "I wanted you to understand that worth isn't measured in dollars, that the value of a person has nothing to do with their bank account or their possessions or the car they drive." I turned to him. "I've been invisible my entire life. At your father's company events, people would look right through me. At parent-teacher conferences, other mothers would talk around me like I wasn't there. In stores, salespeople would help everyone else first, assuming I couldn't afford anything worth their time." Andrew's face showed recognition. He'd probably seen it happen without really noticing. "Being invisible taught me something important," I continued. "It taught me that dignity doesn't come from how others see you. It comes from how you see yourself." I placed my hand over my heart. "I know who I am. I know what I've built. I know what I've accomplished." And that knowledge sustained me through years of being overlooked and underestimated. My voice grew softer. "But tonight, when they called me trash, when they laughed, when my own son looked away, something shifted. I realized that self-respect isn't enough. Sometimes you have to demand respect from others, not because you need their approval, but because silence enables cruelty." Andrew nodded slowly. "I enabled it," he said, "by staying quiet, by making excuses, by choosing comfort over courage." "Yes," I agreed. "You did." The word hung between us, honest and painful. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't something I can just give you like a gift," I said. It's something you have to earn. Through your actions, through changed behavior, through becoming the man I always believed you could be. He wiped his eyes. How do I do that? By making different choices, I said. By standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. By remembering where you came from. By treating people with kindness regardless of what they can do for you. I looked at him seriously. And by understanding that marrying into wealth doesn't make you wealthy, character makes you wealthy, integrity makes you wealthy. The way you treat people when you have power over them, that's what defines who you really are. Andrew was quiet for a long time, processing my words. What about Rebecca? He finally asked. What do I do about her? That's your decision, I said. But ask yourself this. Did she ever defend you to her parents? Did she ever question how they treated me? Did she ever suggest that maybe I deserved better? He thought about it. No, he admitted. She went along with everything they said. Then you have your answer, I said gently. You can love someone and still recognize that they're not right for you. He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. We sat in silence for another few minutes, watching the fountain, listening to the night sounds of Scottsdale. Finally, Andrew spoke again. Can we go home? Can we just leave all of this behind? I stood up, smoothing my simple dress. Yes, I said. We can. He stood beside me, and together we walked to my car, the old one with the dented bumper, the one I'd driven for years because it ran well and served its purpose. I unlocked the doors and we got in. The drive back to my house was quiet, not the uncomfortable silence of earlier, not the tense quiet of people avoiding difficult topics. It was the silence of understanding, of beginning to heal, of a mother and son finding their way back to each other. When I pulled into my driveway, Andrew turned to me. Thank you, he said. For what? For teaching me the most important lesson of my life, even if I had to learn it the hard way. I squeezed his hand. The best lessons usually come the hard way, I said. But what matters is that you learned it. We sat there for a moment longer, neither of us quite ready to let go. Mom? Andrew said quietly. Yes? I'm proud of you. For standing up tonight. For not backing down. For showing everyone that respect isn't optional. I smiled, genuine warmth spreading through my chest. I'm proud of you too, I said. For being here now, for facing the truth, for wanting to do better. And in that moment, sitting in my old car under the stars, I knew we would be okay. It would take time. There would be difficult conversations ahead, but we would rebuild what had been broken. Together. The story didn't end that night outside the Fairmont. In fact, that's when everything truly began. By Sunday morning, less than 12 hours after I walked out of that ballroom, my phone started ringing. Text messages poured in. Emails flooded my inbox. People I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered I existed. Some were genuinely kind. Former neighbors checking in, asking if I was okay. A few old colleagues from the accounting firm congratulating me on standing up for myself. But most of the messages were different. Curious, invasive, people who wanted to know if the rumors were true, if I was really a billionaire, if I'd actually canceled all the payments for Andrew's wedding. I ignored most of them, but the news spread anyway. By Monday, the entire Scottsdale social scene was talking about it. The story had taken on a life of its own, growing with each retelling. Did you hear about the Whitmore wedding? The groom's mother is secretly a billionaire. She paid for everything and then took it all back. Charles Whitmore is furious. Diane hasn't been seen in public since. I learned all of this from Andrew, who was getting his own flood of messages. Friends asking questions. Acquaintances suddenly interested in his family background. People who had ignored him at the wedding, now wanting to meet for coffee. He came to my house 3 days after the wedding, looking exhausted but determined. Mom, I need to tell you something, he said as we sat at my kitchen table. The same table where we'd eaten countless meals together, where I'd helped him with homework, where he'd told me about his dreams and fears. Rebecca and I are done, he said quietly. I wasn't surprised, but I let him continue. After you left that night, she spent the rest of the evening crying and blaming you for ruining everything. She said you were vindictive, that you destroyed her perfect day out of spite. He shook his head. I told her you had every right to do what you did, that her family's behavior was inexcusable, that I should have defended you from the beginning. How did she respond? She said I was choosing you over her, that I'd never really fit into her world anyway, that she should have known better than to marry someone from my background. The words didn't hurt me. They confirmed what I'd already known. She showed you who she really is, I said gently. I know, Andrew replied, and I'm grateful. Better to learn it now than 5 years into a marriage. He reached across the table and took my hand. I'm staying here for a while. If that's okay. I need time to figure out what comes next. You're always welcome here, I said. This is your home. Over the next few days, more news filtered through. The Fairmont confirmed that yes, Meridian Ridge Holdings had indeed funded the wedding, and yes, the payments had been retracted according to the contractual terms. The catering company released a statement saying they'd been paid in full initially by an LLC and were now pursuing payment from the Whitmore family as stipulated in their backup payment agreements. The florist, the photographer, the cake designer, all of them confirmed the same story. Linda Hall, through her company Meridian Ridge Holdings, had paid for everything, and then she'd taken it all back. Legally, properly, exactly according to the contracts. Charles Whitmore tried to fight it. He hired lawyers who sent threatening letters to my attorneys. They claimed the cancellation clauses were unconscionable, that I'd acted in bad faith, that the whole thing was a scheme. My legal team responded with copies of every signed contract, every email confirmation, every piece of documentation showing that the Whitmores had agreed to every single term. The case was dismissed before it even made it to court. Then the bills started arriving at the Whitmore estate. $487,000 for the venue, $72,000 for catering, $38,000 for flowers, $22,000 for photography and videography, $4,000 for the cake. Smaller amounts for the invitations, the programs, the party favors, the valet service, and $83,000 for the Bali honeymoon that would never happen. Total, just over $700,000. Due immediately. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Charles and Diane were scrambling, liquidating investments, borrowing from their retirement accounts, calling in favors from business partners. They could afford it, technically. They had the resources. But it hurt. Financially and publicly, because everyone knew. Everyone talked. Everyone watched as the family that had built their reputation on wealth and status suddenly struggled to cover a wedding bill they'd assumed someone else was paying. The humiliation was complete. Meanwhile, I went back to my quiet life. I drove my old car. I shopped at the same stores. I wore the same simple clothes. Nothing about my daily routine changed, except for one thing. I no longer felt invisible. People saw me now. Really saw me. Not because I'd revealed my wealth, but because I'd revealed my strength. At the grocery store, women nodded to me with respect. At the post office, the clerk who'd always rushed me through suddenly took time to chat. At the coffee shop I'd been visiting for years, the barista asked how I was doing, genuinely interested in the answer. It wasn't the money that changed how people treated me. It was the fact that I'd stood up for myself. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the wedding, I was sitting in my living room when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find a woman I recognized from the wedding. She'd been sitting near the front, one of the Whitmores' close friends. "Mrs. Hall?" she said nervously. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Jennifer." "I remember you," I said. "May I speak with you for a moment?" I considered it, then stepped aside to let her in. We sat in my modest living room, surrounded by furniture I'd owned for decades, family photos on the walls, nothing that screamed wealth or status. Jennifer looked around, seeming surprised by the simplicity. "I came to apologize," she said. "I was at the wedding. I heard what Charles said. I saw people laughing." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't laugh, but I didn't say anything either. I just sat there and I'm ashamed of that." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I've been thinking about it every day since," she said. "About how easily we judge people. About how quickly we dismiss someone based on their appearance, or where they're sitting, or what they're wearing." She met my eyes. "You taught me something important that night. You taught me that dignity isn't about money. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve." I nodded slowly. "I also wanted you to know," she continued, "that not everyone thought what happened was funny. Some of us were horrified. Some of us have been avoiding the Whitmores since that night because we don't want to be associated with that kind of cruelty. Thank you for telling me, I said. She stood to leave, then paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. How did you build all that wealth while staying so humble? I smiled. Humility isn't about making yourself small, I said. It's about understanding that your worth doesn't come from external things. It comes from who you are when no one important is watching. She nodded, understanding. After she left, I thought about her question. How did I stay humble? The answer was simple. I remembered where I came from. I remembered the nights I cried after my husband died, terrified I wouldn't be able to provide for Andrew. I remembered the years of sacrifice, the careful budgeting, the choices between what I wanted and what I needed. Money didn't change those memories. It didn't erase the struggle. It didn't make me a different person. It just gave me options. And when those options were taken for granted, when my generosity was met with contempt, I exercised the most powerful option of all, the option to walk away. Andrew and I had dinner together that evening. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread, the meal I'd been making for him since he was 5 years old. Mom, he said as we ate, I've been thinking about what I want to do next. Tell me. I want to start over. Away from the Whitmores, away from that world. I want to build something meaningful, something I can be proud of. I smiled. What do you have in mind? I'm not sure yet, he admitted. But I know I want to do it the right way, the way you did, honestly, quietly, without shortcuts or status or connections. That's not an easy path, I warned. I know, he said, but it's the right one. We finished dinner in comfortable silence, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. My son had learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach his entire life, not through lectures or warnings, but through example. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable, and sometimes standing up for yourself teaches others how to stand up too. The Whitmores eventually paid their bills. They had no choice. The contracts were ironclad, and my lawyers made sure every dollar was collected. I heard that Charles and Diane became more selective about their social events after that, more cautious about who they mocked, more aware that appearances can be deceiving. Rebecca moved to California shortly after, taking a job with a tech company. I heard she got engaged again a year later, to someone from a family even wealthier than the Whitmores. I wished her well. Genuinely. Because her choices weren't my concern anymore. As for me, I continued building Meridian Ridge Holdings. Quietly, strategically, the way I'd always done. But I also did something new. I started a foundation, one that helps single mothers invest in their futures, that provides financial education and seed money for women who want to build businesses but don't have the resources to start. I called it the David Hall Foundation, after my late husband, because he would have loved seeing his legacy help others. The foundation stays small, intentionally. I don't want publicity or recognition. I just want to give other women the chance I gave myself, the chance to build something real, something lasting, something that belongs to them alone. Looking back on that night at the Fairmont, I don't regret a single moment. Not the humiliation, not the confrontation, not the decision to cancel every payment. Because that night, I learned something crucial. Wealth doesn't excuse cruelty. Status doesn't justify disrespect. And kindness isn't measured by bank accounts. The Whitmores had money, connections, social standing, but they lacked the one thing that truly matters: class. Not the kind you buy, the kind you build, through how you treat people, through how you act when you think no one important is watching, through how you respond when you have power over others. Real class is defending someone who can't defend themselves. Real class is treating everyone with dignity, regardless of what they can do for you. Real class is understanding that a person's worth has nothing to do with their clothes, their car, or where they sit at a wedding. I wore a simple dress that night. I sat at table 36. I carried a purse with a frayed strap. And when they called me trash, when they laughed, when they thought they'd won, I showed them something they'll never forget. I showed them that the woman they mocked was the one who paid for everything. The woman they dismissed was worth more than most of them would ever see. The woman they thought was powerless had all the power. They mocked the wrong woman, because I wasn't trash. I was the billionaire who paid for everything. And in the end, Respect isn't something you can buy. It's something you demand. And that night, standing at that microphone in front of 650 people, I demanded mine. And you know what? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated or judged unfairly? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories. And if this resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about standing up, speaking out, and never accepting less than you deserve. Because everyone deserves respect, no matter what they're wearing.